Alright, let's talk about multi-tenancy in healthcare. Because this is very different from normal SaaS. In most products, multi-tenancy is about saving infrastructure costs. In HR systems, multi-tenancy is a hard compliance boundary. If patient data from one organization can even leak into another, even accidentally, you are already in violation territory. So in this video, I'm gonna walk you through how we actually design multi-tenant EHR platforms in Ruby on Rails, focusing on patient-level data isolation, tenant enforcement that developers can't accidentally bypass, where gems help and where they absolutely don't, and how we combine Rails patterns with database-level security. This is very practical, very opinionated, and very real-world. Let's start with the basics. There are usually three ways people do multi-tenancy. One database per tenant, one schema per tenant, shared database, shared schema. In healthcare, each of these has trade-offs. Database per tenant sounds safe. It becomes a nightmare when you have hundreds of clinic, migrations, analytics, backups, all get messy. Schema per tenant helps a bit, but reporting and cross-tenant insights become painful. So most serious EHR platforms eventually land on one database, one schema, very strict row-level isolation. Rails works great, but only if you are disciplined about it. Everything starts with the data model. If the model is sloppy, no amount of policy code will save you. At a minimum, we usually model a tenant, think healthcare organization or provider group, users, clinicians, admins, caregivers, patients, and clinical records like encounters. Here's what the code of Rails looks like. One of the biggest mistakes I see in Rails apps is relying on developers to remember tenant scoping. That doesn't scale, especially not in healthcare. So instead, we make tenant context global and unavoidable. Rails give us a great tool for this, current attributes. So here you can see we have a class current that is inheriting from active support current attributes. Then right at the controller level, here is the application controller. From this point on, everything in the request lifecycle knows which tenant it belongs to. No guessing, no passing tenant IDs around manually. Now at this point, someone really asks, why not just use access tenant and call it a day? And honestly, that's a fair question. Access tenant is a solid gem. It enforces application level scoping and makes developer less likely to mess things up. Here's a typical setup. That's totally fine for Rails level discipline, but here's the key thing. In an EHR system, Rails cannot be your final security boundary. Background jobs, reporting queries, raw SQL, those things exist in real systems. And when they do, you want the database itself to say, nope, you are not allowed to see that. So we treat tenancy gems as a convenience layer, not a compliance mechanism. Let's talk about default scopes, because yes, they are controversial. But in healthcare, controlled default scoping is often the safer choice. For example, here we have a patient table. This way, if someone accidentally writes patient.all, they don't leak PHI across tenants. Now, when we do need to bypass this, say for an admin report, we do it very explicitly. Patient.unscoped.where tenant ID. The rule is simple. Isolation is automatic, exceptions are intentional. Tenant isolation alone is not enough. Inside a tenant, not every clinician should see every patient. That's where patient level authorization comes in. Using something like Pandit. In real EHR systems, this usually expands to care teams, consent rules, temporary access grants, emergency break glass access, but tenant and patient checks should always be there. Now here's the part a lot of Rails apps skip, and honestly, this is where healthcare systems separate themselves. We enforce isolation at the database level using PostgreSQL row level security. Then when Rails connects, now even if someone writes unsafe SQL, the database itself blocks cross-tenant access. That's real defense in depth. Finally, healthcare systems must be auditable. Every time someone views or modifies patient data, it should be logged. You can see the class audit log. This gives you HIPAA audit trails, incident investigation capability, and actual accountability. At the end of the day, multi-tenancy in EHR systems is not about clever Rails tricks. It's about layers. Rails for discipline, policies for intent, database for enforcement. Rails gives you the tools, but the responsibility is still yours.